try to say the same thing about Socrates. Oh, where's the evidence that Socrates exists? I don't know. Even if you were able to give me evidence that he didn't exist, I don't have to believe in Socrates.
Yep.
You do need to believe in Jesus.
Absolutely. I'm saying that even if I could not give you a double-blind, peer-reviewed lab study that demonstrates Jesus' divinity, a rational person could believe in it. And I think it's just an ad hoc, silly definition of rational or irrational to assume that all the people who believe that thing by default are irrational.
But you're saying they would believe it based on testimony.
Yeah.
Sure. My final question then would just be that if faith can in fact justify any belief, how can it be rational when it comes to the Christian belief?
Well, I'm not saying that faith as a category it is rational, right? We've just said there are good reasons and bad reasons people might hold any given belief. You could be a person of faith for a very bad reason. I think that's possible. I'm not denying that. But the fact that there is this category of special belief that we're calling faith that can be used just off the top of my head to justify anything doesn't mean that all faith is then bad and unjustifiable. Popular. I don't know. But so thank you guys for hanging out. I don't know. I'm really dumb and bad with OBS, so you may just be listening to me talk to Hunter. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get Discord to work. I've tried split cam and a bunch of other stuff, and it just ruins everything else. But I'm going to be chatting with Hunter about this tweet that that we've talked about a little bit already. His claim that to be a Christian means to be inherently irrational. I was listening to a little bit of his stream earlier while I was trying to put my baby down for a nap, and he said that he is open to the idea that you could that somebody could have faith that is not irrational, but that Christianity itself is by nature irrational. So that's sort of, yeah. I'm interested to see what he says in our conversation, just see where it goes. But yeah, it's it'll be fun. It'll be fun. I have places I don't want the conversation to go. I don't want it to turn into like an apologetics theme. Like, I'm not interested in trying to like reconvert him to Christianity. I'm interested in dealing with what I take to be like very large and weighty claims that he's made on Twitter the past couple of days that are worth discussing, right? I think it matters if we want to be rational people, and we're also people of faith. If such people exist, it matters if you literally cannot be a rational Christian. So why specifically Christianity? From the atheist standpoint, you could argue that about any organized religion. I think it's going to be because Hunter was Christian in the past, went through a period of questioning, and did the kind of digging that he thinks would be required to hold it rationally, and found it wanting. I think that might be why. So I'm curious to ask him about that as well, though, Nick, that like I think it's because he did the kind of investigation he thought would be necessary to make a faith-based belief justified, and thought that the evidence weighed against it. Which, okay, fair enough. But it seemed, yeah. We'll talk about it. We'll see what he has to say. Yeah. Boring day at the spreadsheet factory. What prep that we don't see goes into these? I spent most of last night and today, the time that I had, rereading some stuff, particularly by Richard Swinburne, who I really like. He's a philosopher of religion, taught at Oxford for like 50 years or something. But he has this, I think, really useful approach to religious belief and whether we consider it rational or not. He has a 3-part series of books. The last one in the series is called Faith and Reason, and it's super good, at least the parts that I've read. He basically takes this like Bayesian statistical probability updating view of what it means to develop religious belief and approach these topics. But he treats a lot of different competing perspectives really well. Anyway, he's the kind of person that I'm curious what Hunter thinks about. Right, is this guy who spent the past 50 years of his career not just talking about religion up here in the clouds, but like digging into evidence out there in other disciplines, right? Saying, okay, well, I want to assess the claim of authorship of this particular biblical text. Let's go attempt to find it out. He's done that kind of work. I think, like, you know, is that person irrational? Is that person failing to do critical analysis of his faith? Or is he just not looking at the correct evidence, you know? I don't think you can keep them from being just about definitional disagreements, right? So if he wants to say that a belief is technically irrational if he disagrees with it, or if he's not sufficiently convinced that he should hold that belief, then fine, okay. But I think the problem...
Hello, Philip.
Oh. Hello, how's it going?
Going good. Wow, you sound nice and clear, nice and crispy.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
You do streams regularly, or you just got a nice mic?
I don't really stream regularly, but I have on occasion, and I've started back up. But I taught online during the pandemic, so I was like, I might as well get a good setup so my students can have the best experience possible in a really terrible online environment.
Yeah, wow, it sounds nice and clear, especially compared to the person I was just talking to.
Yeah, I listened to a little bit of that. That was an adventure.
So I'll go ahead and pull up the tweet in question.
Cool.
What's this one right here? So it's the one on faith.
Yes.
God hasn't made himself known in any provable way. To be a Christian, faith is necessary. Faith is unjustified belief. Clinging to unjustified belief is irrational. Therefore, to be a Christian means to be inherently irrational.
Yeah.
So what are your big disagreements here? I might take notes.
Yeah, sure. So I think I want to talk first about, the first claim. God hasn't made himself known in any provable way. I'm curious what you mean by provable. I think the first part here, like leading up to the idea that to be a Christian, faith is necessary. I'm not sure how necessary it is, because I think we're going to concede, being a Christian requires faith. But your next step, right, that faith is unjustified belief, or that it's a kind of clinging to an unjustified belief, I think that's, contestable as well. So I'm curious what you think would justify a belief, what would be required for a belief to be considered justified for you. So I think that's where I wanted to start.
So generally speaking, I do tend to base my beliefs on the science, the data, scientific research, empiricism, some people might want to call it. Generally, I like to have evidence, strong evidence to back up my claims. So when I say something like systemic racism is a thing, and then I have the data to support that claim, I don't think that I'm taking faith to believe systemic racism is a thing.
Sure. So do you think that you have beliefs that you couldn't, like, on the spot back up with data? Do you think that there are beliefs that you hold that you couldn't, like, persuade somebody who's also an empiricist are true?
I mean, are you going to go with the how do you know that we're not, like, living in a simulation thing?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways. I'm just curious. Like, I'm just, like, trying to figure out your, like, self-assessment here. Because I think one of the issues that I had with the tweet is that I think it's setting up, like, an epistemic standard that I don't know if anybody is going to meet. I think what's going to happen if we run with this really rigorously is that we're all going to have a ton of beliefs that on this definition might be unjustified, but we may not want to say people are irrational to hold, right? So I can't necessarily always ad hoc off the top of my head present a great argument or evidence for any particular thing that I believe, but I still might have good reasons for believing that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, what do you think I believe that I don't have evidence for? I mean, if we want to talk about the beginning of the universe, I mean, we have evidence that supports the claim of the Big Bang. Usually the main thing that I hear is, oh, well, you have faith that we aren't in a simulation, or something to that degree, to which I usually respond and say, first of all, heart solipsism is something that has always plagued philosophers. Second of all, my way of going about things does not necessitate faith. Lastly, I don't think I'm taking faith in believing that I'm not in a simulation. I think that based on my own experience and whatnot, and based on other forms of data, it's obvious that we are sharing a space, because I refuse to believe. I think it would take more faith to believe that I single-handedly have made every good argument and every bad argument, that I'm terrible at math right now, but somehow am also really good at math. I don't think that makes any sense.
Sure.
I think that can also be backed up.
I don't, we could maybe go down some stuff like this. I don't know if I want to do the simulation thing, but I think there is a real problem that you probably do believe, separate from like the whole solipsism or we're living in a simulation thing, like you probably believe that other people have internal experiences. And you mentioned the beginning of the universe, right? That's a good example of something. So you said, we have empirical evidence. Okay, but you haven't done the empirical studies yourself, right? What you have done is you've studied these topics, you've been given testimony from other people that you take to be authoritative or expert in the field, and it comports in some way with what you think that evidence should look like, and you accept it. But you're accepting it on testimony, right?
No, it's not testimony. I completely reject that. This isn't just scientist comes up and says it's this way and then I believe it.
Sure.
There's evidence. There's evidence explained within the research.
Right. So, but my point is, you yourself are not this expert, right? You're taking the evidence.
I don't need
therein.
to be, and I never claim to be.
Right.
And also, it's usually the Christians who like to base things off of their own personal experiences. I don't need a personal experience. I don't need to look myself through a telescope in order to have an understanding of how the Big Bang may have taken place, when there is research and evidence for that claim. It's not just testimony.
Sure. Well, it is a type of testimony, though. So what I'm saying is what ordinarily happens for most human beings, right?
Can we not? Isn't testimony without there's not usually evidence behind it, right?
No, well, in court, testimony is a type of evidence, but no, that's not necessarily true, right? So somebody somebody tells you something, right? And generally, this is just how we grow up and how we develop beliefs from childhood, right? Somebody tells you something and you believe it. I watched part of your video on your own religious experience, right? This is what happens to those of us who grow up Christian. We're told to believe something, and we do. That's generally how we form beliefs, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in religion. Somebody tells us something, and we accept it. As we grow, we might find reason to question things that we've been told, and then we go out and we look for other sources that might test or challenge that, and we compare them, and then we look for reasons to go with one testimony or another, or one authority or another, or one set of evidence or another. But my question is how you know when you arrived at these beliefs that you've accepted this evidence or this testimony, how you think it's justifiable. You've said it's empirical, right? I'm saying that I don't think that's the only type of proof that's relevant. We also have logical proofs and philosophical proofs. These things matter. But sure, I mean empirical evidence is one thing that we use to justify our beliefs. What I'm saying is we all have a whole host of beliefs that we may not even be conscious of at any given moment that we couldn't necessarily present empirical evidence for. But I want to say that I think those people.
Can you give an example? Because I mean, you've surely heard of the phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right?
Sure.
So, sure, if somebody comes up to me and tells me that they have a new dog, then I probably will just believe their testimony, because that's not required for my entire worldview. I don't hold a belief that says I must believe this thing, even though, I mean, I personally don't find there to be adequate evidence, in order to obtain salvation. I know that people get dogs. I know that people have dogs for pets. I also have friends who I trust. So if they tell me they get a dog, I will accept that, yes.
Right. Yeah.
But if they tell me they have a pet dragon, well, suddenly now I'm not so sure, right?
Sure. But the question isn't whether or not you are sure or whether or not you are convinced. Your claim was universalistic, right? You were making a universal claim that is a type of belief that is impossible to justify. That this type of faith, particularly in the Christian God, is by its nature unjustifiable in a way that makes any Christian faith inherently and intrinsically irrational, right? So you're talking about a type of belief that you were saying is in principle unjustifiable. It's not just that any given person doesn't justify it. You don't think it can be. And I'm asking why you think that's the case. Because what standard of justification do you have?
What evidence is there that Jesus was divine? What evidence is there that there is in fact a God? What evidence is there that there's the Christian God? Those would be the first questions I would ask.
Sure. So, I mean, I know you're familiar. There are people who have presented arguments they think are compelling for the existence of a God, and that gets adopted in a system as kind of a basic proposition, and then they argue from that, right? So
what?
I mean, the ontological argument, Aquinas' 5 ways, going back to Aristotle, right? There are people who've presented arguments that actually, you were talking about Michael Knowles earlier, not that I want to be on his side, but he's somebody who went through a period of lack of faith and then was persuaded back into his faith by religious arguments. These people exist, right? There are philosophers of religion for a reason. These people are arguing about things they think are within the domain of reason, a kind of evidence or a kind of argument or propositional proof.
You see there being a difference between, like, here's a philosophical concept that could suggest a God, as opposed to here is a claim made with evidence that can also be reproduced, that has a predictive ability to it. Do you think that there's a difference there?
Yes, I'm asking you though, given the fact that there are people who have beliefs that don't at any given moment necessarily admit of this kind of predictive proof, are all of those people irrational? You've given me this one specific type of thing, faith, particularly in the Christian God, that you are claiming it's not possible to justifiably hold. And that is a universalistic and very strong claim.
Then?
Well, I'm saying,
what is an argument then? What do you find to be a convincing argument?
We've got to separate what any particular person finds convincing from this concept that you're giving me that it's not possible for somebody to reasonably be convinced, right? Those are two different things. You don't have to accept. So do you think it's possible for, even on an empirical framework, two people to approach the same evidence and arrive at different conclusions?
Do I think that's possible? Yes, but I do think that with science and empiricism, you avoid that happening far more often, as opposed to religion, which you have. I mean, back in the days of slavery, you literally had some Christians saying slavery was good because of the Bible, and then you had other Christians saying slavery is bad because of the Bible. I think that it's possible for everybody to come to wrong conclusions based on really any method they're using, but I think that science provides a much more reliable basis, whereas religion has time and time again shown it's incredibly subjective. Excuse me.
Okay, sure. I'm not going to deny the usefulness of empirical tests. This is something that we both, I'm sure, agree on. But I'm saying what you have even in science are examples like Leibniz objected to Newton's development of gravitational theory because he thought Newton was reintroducing this medieval idea that the heavenly bodies had their own principles of movement, right? They were approaching the same concept, the same notion, attacking it theoretically like we do so often in science, and coming to very different conclusions. They had different beliefs. I think they may have both been justified or rational in holding those beliefs and then subjecting them to further testing and ongoing, right?
What claim is there of God that can be reproduced the same way that certain scientific claims can be?
I mean, well, as you've already mentioned, right, that if you are a Christian and you accept certain things about the New Testament or the life of Jesus, you would expect there to be some sort of empirical evidence of that. If you don't find it, that might be a challenge, right? But there are things that you might expect the world to be like if a God as you've proposed it exists, and people will work through these arguments philosophically.
But isn't that just working backwards? Isn't that saying I would suspect that if a God exists, then there will be such a thing as gravity. Hey, look, gravity exists, so God exists. So isn't that backwards?
Right, that's not precisely what I'm saying. I'm saying there are people who have looked out at the world and found, in their estimation, sufficient reason to believe that there is some sort of transcendent being. That gets taken in as a propositional belief, and then you work from that basis to attempt to reason out what else might be demanded by that. We do this all the time. I'm you want to be empirical, right? But a lot of our current scientific advancements are based in theoretical physics that is doing exactly this kind of work. Here's something we're going to accept as true. What might follow from that? What might be expected to be real because of that, right? So I just, the idea that, well, we've solved this problem now, there's no real controversy because we are going to be empirical about this, doesn't, to me, support the claim that you're giving me, which is any particular belief that you're going to call faith is in principle unjustifiable. So what, again, I'm still not...
a justified Christian belief? You said the New Testament.
Sure. So, okay. I think a justified Christian belief is Jesus lived, right? That's a justified Christian belief.
Could... Yeah, sure. And you know what? There's enough historical evidence that Jesus existed that I would say that's justified. However, where is the evidence that he was divine, rose from the dead, etc.?
Well, again, this is an issue of reasoning through expectations, right? So what might we expect if Jesus had been divine? There might have been the testimony that we have recorded. So I want to back up a few steps. We're getting into, we can talk about the empiric stuff, we can talk about the New Testament stuff, but I just want to back up a few steps. You said earlier on your stream, I was listening, you said you thought it might be possible for some type of faith to be a justified belief. Could you give me an example of what that might look like for you?
Well, I should probably rephrase, because I do think that it's possible for somebody to have some kind of a personal experience in which they attribute it to God and feel as though they are justified in believing in that God because of their own personal experience.
Okay.
The problem with that is, though, one, what is that personal experience? Because most of the time when I've heard it, it's not actually evidence of a God. And two, your personal experience cannot be reproduced and cannot be used as an argument to convince anyone else. So I don't know actually how much of a benefit that really is at the end of the day.
Oh, okay, it may not be a benefit in the way that you're talking about it, but you're talking about whether or not somebody who holds to the Christian faith is in principle and always irrational as a person, right? So whether or not I can persuade you of everything that I believe, that doesn't make me irrational unless your standard of rationality is purely what Hunter agrees with at any given moment and everyone else is irrational.
But a lot
right?
of the things in which Christians believe are rooted in faith. More so, the Christian faith deliberately says that we are saved through faith.
Yeah.
So faith is a requirement with this belief system.
So what do you think faith is? You say here that you say that faith is unjustified belief. Why do you have that definition of faith? How are you defining faith?
Because if you had evidence, I don't think you would need to invoke faith.
No, that's not true. You can have evidence-based faith. That's not what faith has historically meant. It's not what the Bible uses it as.
Doesn't faith mean complete and total trust and confidence in something?
Yes. Yeah, and that can be grounded in a reason. I might have complete and total trust and confidence in a parental figure because in the past they have never failed me, and I have that faith in them, right? It can be grounded in some sort of, I can reason myself to the confidence, right? It doesn't have to be irrational. It doesn't have to be completely unfounded.
Okay, so what is the founded belief or faith within the Christian belief?
Well, so, I mean, you could look at like how Aquinas approaches this issue, right? He says there are things that we're going to call preambles to the faith, things that a rational thinking person could, just work through logically and learn some things about the world. And then that might lead you certain places. It might lead you to faith. And then faith is going to ask you to accept things, yes, that not every reasoning person is going to agree with. It's going to ask things that are not demanded syllogistically. It's demanded by your faith, by the authority you're taking it on, by divine word, right? But there's a process to get there that has a groundedness or a rationality for him. And so what you're saying here, and then in your subsequent tweet, right, where you said that like any critical analysis will show the foundation of the faith to be flawed, what you're saying is that anybody who's gone through that work and attempted to do that critical analysis, well, they're just kind of self-deceived. Like they haven't actually done it if they still remain a Christian. They must be irrational. And that's the part that I'm completely unpersuaded of. I don't think I have the power to bring you back to the church or persuade you that I'm correct on everything. I'm saying like you have presented this very universalistic assumption that anybody who engages in critical analysis, perhaps the way that you did, would arrive at the same conclusions. And I'm saying that's just not true. Like practically isn't true, logically isn't true.
I feel like a lot of what you're saying right here is like, philosophically speaking, this is why I disagree. That's fine, but like, where's the practicality here? Where is the justified faith when it comes to Christianity?
I mean, I could give you examples of people that I think have rational and justified faith. I'm not sure what you're looking for, though.
Like whom? What? Give me an actual example to look at.
Okay, so like Richard Swinburne, okay, is a philosopher of religion. He taught at Oxford for like 5 decades. He has a whole 3-book trilogy on faith and reason and how he reasons through and to the faith that he has, right? So these people exist. They're out there, and what you have presented me with is a total statement that says actually that person is fundamentally irrational. If they were doing any Richard Swinburne, S-W-I-N-B-U-R-N-E. Historic Christian thinkers and philosophers, right, who have been defending the foundations of their faith from the beginning, right? Like, so this is Christians from the get-go were accused of just accepting things on faith and not thinking through them. And Origen, writing in early Christian writings, is responding to a critic who said, hey, you just teach people to believe. And he's like, well, look, if everybody had the time to do philosophy, everybody should be doing it, right? And so we're doing the work of philosophy. We're defending our beliefs in our articles.
I'm looking at this right now, and this is irrational.
Sorry?
Swinburne's principle of credulity?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not going to take.
I'm sorry. Religious experience,
Hunter,
a principle which allows one to infer.
Hunter, I'm not going to take you seriously if you read a Wikipedia article and say his entire argument is irrational when the dude has a 50-year career.
It's not on Wikipedia. I looked up what is his principle of credulity, and it's not on Wikipedia.
Okay. I'm saying this is a person who spent 5 decades writing and articulating these things, responded to criticisms at length in scholarship, in public work, right? So, like you just saying, "Oh, I've just Googled it, and this is irrational." I'm just not going to take it seriously.
I'm reading one of his arguments because I wanted a direct example, and upon seeing it, an argument that it allows people to just infer. That is not a good argument.
I'm sorry.
Because now we have to trust other people's inference.
Oh yes, we do this all the time. This is how belief formation works, right? We believe something because we believe it is probabilistically, like we believe it's more likely true than not. It's how it happens all the time. If you want to dig into his works, he goes through this kind of at length, and then how we justify our beliefs with reference to each other, what things we take in as propositions that are basic beliefs that we then build on, right? There's tomes on this, right? So I don't want to litigate a particular, I'm not saying like I'm a great advocate for this guy's philosophy. He's a great advocate for it. You should read him. I'm saying what you have presented me with on Twitter is the idea that none of these people who are engaging in this critical analysis, who remain Christians, are actually rational. None of these scholars, none of these Christians, none of these figures ever have been rational people. They, according to Hunter, are irrational. And if they had just looked harder at the foundation of their faith, they would have left.
Do you think that like inferring something to the degree of a all-knowing entity exists is rational?
I think there are reasonable arguments for the existence of a transcendent being, yes.
So what are some of those reasonable arguments? Because I keep asking you and you're not giving them to me. You're eager to critique my tweet.
I am.
Fine.
Yeah, no,
I know, which is fine. You're here to do that.
Yeah, that's why.
What is the alternative? Where is the example of here's a Christian faith belief that is actually rational, Hunter?
I've given you one thinker who has a large body of work, right? If you want to dig through sometime Aquinas's 5 ways, right? He sets these out in his Summa. These are the arguments he thinks that thinking people can use to determine that there is some sort of transcendent being out there. Some of them are modeled on things that Aristotle did. He says Aristotle got a lot wrong, right? But there are people who have done this work. So yes, I'm not saying that I have the capability right now of presenting you with a persuasive case that is going to convince you, Hunter. I'm saying everybody who doesn't convince you, Hunter, is not therefore irrational. That's the problem.
Okay, I never said that you have to convince me in order to be considered rational. I just haven't said that. That's not even my argument. So we have the argument from motion, the argument from efficient cause.
Hunter, so you've said that all Christians are inherently irrational, and that anyone who did critical analysis of the faith would find the foundations of it undermined. Do you think these people are not doing critical analysis of their faith?
I think that none of these people exist. Analysis of their faith, sure, but this is still irrational. Yes.
So how would you go about critically analyzing a belief? If I have a belief and I find some reason to doubt it,
for some evidence of that belief. Why do you believe this thing?
Okay, and if I do that with any given belief, likely it's going to be because I read it or heard it somewhere. Okay, so now what?
Then if that's your reason, then that would also be irrational.
It's not. That's how people form beliefs.
If you read it and wait. Okay. We're talking about a belief such as, did my mom get ice cream yesterday? Fine. But when we're talking about basing your entire worldview, your fundamental belief being built around this thing, then yes, where the fuck is the evidence? And it better not just be, I read it or somebody said it.
I don't really want to do this like weird philosophy game where it's like, well, why is this evidence persuasive to you? What's the standard you refer to determine whether or not it's persuasive? But that's part of the problem here, is that you have set up your own standard of rationality, and you said this is the threshold.
I'm asking for evidence.
I'm presenting things to you that the people have presented and argued for, right? And have done the kind of work that you want them to do, critically analyze their faith, and still find themselves people of faith. Right, people have done the critical work of like critical scholarship on the development of the New Testament and have still emerged being Christians. Right, these are people who do real good scholarship. It's out there. The fact that you don't read it or you aren't familiar with them doesn't mean they don't exist, but you've claimed that they don't exist, or at least that they're irrational people.
Okay, so for the first argument, the argument from motion, since everything that moves is moved by another, there must thereby exist an unmoved mover. Who's to say that unmoved mover is God?
Fair enough.
Why couldn't it be something else?
Right. So then that's a separate argument. If you're persuaded by the argument that there has to be an unmoved mover, then we get to argue about what that unmoved mover is, and we can have that discussion. And that's exactly what Aquinas does. And as I said, like he gets to a point where he says, yes, there are things you are asked to accept by faith, but the fact that there are things that you can't reason to directly does not mean that you are therefore irrational, that you are acting contrary to reason.
Okay, the second argument, the argument from efficient cause. The sequence of causes which make up this universe must have a first cause. Who's to say that first cause is God?
Same, ditto to what I just said, right? These are preambles. These are foundations. These are, I can sit with a thinking person perhaps and persuade them that there is this thing that is this unmoved mover, this first cause. Okay, great. Now let's talk about it and what we can figure out it might be like and how we might find that out, right? That is a pursuit of rational inquiry, and people have done that.
Okay. Since all existent things depend upon another thing for their existence, there must exist at least one thing that is not dependent, and so is a necessary being. That sounds pretty reasonable to me, but again, it's the same exact question.
Sure.
What's to say this is God?
Sure.
The other
it's
one
a
is
good question. Yeah.
Radiation. Since all existent things can be compared to such qualities as degrees of goodness, there must exist something that is an absolutely good being. Okay. And then the argument from design. The intricate design and order of existent things and natural processes imply that a great designer exists. I would actually take the most issue with that one.
Okay.
Because arguments from design are not very convincing arguments, especially when you just flip it around to, maybe this planet wasn't designed for us, maybe this planet happened to be the correct planet to facilitate evolution. Not to mention, everything that we've witnessed thus far that comes off as being intricate and unique has a natural explanation.
Okay, sure. Fair enough. All right, so I'm going to back up for a second. Empirically, right? If you just dig into, especially like historical sciences, you want to do some like geology, some paleontology, what you're going to find is people going out, collecting evidence, and then attempting to explain that evidence. Say, what happened here? We're reconstructing a crime scene, kind of, right? And what you'll find in these historical sciences primarily are papers that argue like best fit evidence, right? Here's a possible explanation. Here's a possible explanation. The best fit to the evidence is this explanation, right? We can't test this and repeat it. It already happened. Here's our best fit explanation to the evidence of what happened. That is a type of scientific inquiry that people do. It's the same process in this sort of philosophical inquiry that I'm describing to you that other people have done. I'm not saying I can do this on stream for you. I'm not saying I can like sit here and address all like outline each of Aquinas' arguments and persuade you. I'm saying people are doing this, and they are doing this today, and they have been doing this for thousands of years.
It's all back to faith. That's my problem.
Okay, in what sense are you saying it's all back to faith?
You just said for Aquinas' arguments, a lot of them do, yes, ultimately rest on faith.
No, I'm saying what he's presenting you are different ways he thinks that you could reason to the existence of some sort of transcendent being. And then we get to have some arguments about what that being might look like. We can do that inferentially from looking out at the world. We can do that inferentially from looking at different competing religious claims, people who claim that they've spoken to this transcendent being, right? We can do that evidentially, yes. And that's subsequent to this like foundational thing that's saying, hey, look, I think there's a sufficient and good reason to believe that this transcendent thing exists, right? I'm just...
You're saying because Aquinas has presented this, or because there's other arguments to be made, that it rationally justifies an inference that there must be a transcendent being.
I'm saying that a person could be rational who draws those conclusions from evidence, yes. And so what I'm saying...
I'm wondering if it's based on evidence, why you need faith. Like, I don't have faith in science.
Well, again, I don't want to do the language games here, but at some point, right, you are taking some fundamental proposition as an authority. You've decided it's your senses and reasoning and empirical evidence. Like, that's fine. But at some point, you're going to have the thing that decides all of the other things. And when I try to ask you to defend that on its own terms, you can't. You can't give me empirical evidence for the reason I should always trust empirical evidence.
When it comes to the scientific method, it has been tested time and time again. It can be reproduced,
yes,
and it has been proven reliable over and over again. Not to mention, the only thing that proves science is more science.
So prove to me that I should care about reliability. Prove to me that I should care about empirical reproducibility.
Because if you want to believe things that are true, which I think that we all have a responsibility to believe things that are true and rational, not to mention, because that thought process informs other decisions you make as well. Maybe in one aspect it doesn't seem like it matters, but it might, and it oftentimes does. Not to mention, like I've said before, what position can you not take on faith?
I suppose, the possibilities are infinite. Yes, you could take any position on faith. Yes, sure.
So how is any of this rational?
I'm sorry. Neither of us denies that there are people who believe things for bad reasons, right? There are atheists who are atheists for bad reasons. There are people who believe maybe even true scientific things for bad reasons. We're not talking about particular instances of bad reasoning. We're talking about the idea that if somebody comes to a conclusion you dislike, you think they must have arrived at it by bad reasoning. That's your essential claim.
No, I'm saying the conclusion itself is irrational because it hinges upon faith, which cannot be demonstrated. It's unjustified.
Okay, again, explain to me succinctly what you take faith to be. What are you counting as faith? There's types of belief, right?
this
Oh,
is
no, hang
one
on. Sorry, I want to clarify. I'm not trying to like talk over. I just want to clarify what I'm saying.
No,
right.
it's
So,
fine.
so there are types of belief that you hold, right? Like you said, you believe that your mom got ice cream. You believe the Earth is X number of years old. You believe that there's no good reason to believe in the existence of God. These are beliefs that you hold for various reasons. Right? There's a category of belief that we're talking about that is faith or faith-based belief, right? That there's this thing that I am taking on faith, or I have faith that this thing exists or is a certain way. That's a type of belief. And you were saying that type of belief is categorically unjustifiable. So what is that? Like, boil it down for me. What faith
I'm
is
reading
in this
it right
category?
here. Hebrew roots. Faith means belief, firm persuasion, assurance, firm conviction, faithfulness. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and the assurance that the Lord is working, even though we cannot see it. Faith knows that no matter what the situation in our lives or someone else's, that the Lord is working in it.
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds pretty fucking irrational to me.
Do you think that I could have a good reason for having that level of confidence? Do you think that's hypothetically possible?
I think that you can think you have good reason, but I think if we were to analyze those supposed good reasons, they would quickly crumble.
Okay, so you think that there's like some neutral standpoint that from which we could evaluate everybody else's reasons for thinking and believing as they do.
Hey, what is one of those reasons?
No,
a lot of the times it's, oh, well, I prayed and then I got better from this thing, on top of the fact that they went under treatment and took a bunch of medicine. Like, a lot of the times it's just that kind of shit.
So do you think that somebody has a good reason to believe something if they've seen the results happen over and over and over again? Is that a good reason?
I think that, again, they can believe that that is a good reason, and I think that they can, again, believe that they have good reason, but I would want to know, what have they seen demonstrated over and over and over again? Because I can't just blanket say that. I need to know.
Right, so...
But thus far, every Christian I've spoken to is not able to give me any kind of legitimate evidence. It's just, well, I prayed and then I felt better, or, well, I went to church and then this happened, or it's basically just the rejection of any coincidence.
So I'm curious what your standard of good evidence is. Is it evidence that you find fully sufficiently persuasive?
No, it's something that ideally could be reproduced.
Okay.
Or tested to a degree.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be convincing to me. I'm not the arbiter of what is and isn't rational. Nor have I ever claimed to be.
So, all right, I'm dancing around an example that I don't think is going to be effective, so I'm trying to come at it from a different direction.
Do you think there's something to be said about how humans, like, witness patterns? We're really good at viewing patterns, even if there's not actually a pattern there?
Yes, 100%. 100%.
So couldn't that explain why some people think that their belief in God is proving effective over and over again? They're ignoring the misses and just remembering the positives?
That is absolutely possible, yes. I'm fully admitting that failures of reasoning exist. Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what the demonstration is then that there is in fact a way to have a rational faith in the Christian God.
So, okay, let's take, so you're talking about justifying beliefs on the basis of something hopefully repeatable, testable, experimental, right? But I have other beliefs that are not of a kind that can be tested that way, right? I believe that last week I was in a different city in my state, right? I know the day, right? I have that belief. I hold it to be so. If you asked me if that belief was justified, how could I go about justifying it to you?
Justify, what was the claim exactly? Sorry.
A week ago I was in Nashville. If I hold that belief, how could I go about justifying that belief to you? I believe that me, Philip, the person, was in Nashville, Tennessee a week ago. How could I justify that to you? And it's sufficiently that you would think I had a good reason for believing it.
Well, I mean, probably if you were in Nashville, if you had, I don't know. I don't know what the exact answer would even be to that.
I mean, so my belief is based on my memory of being in Nashville, right?
And you traveled there.
Right. Yeah, so that's my belief.
So do you have any evidence that you have traveled to Nashville? Do you have any pay stubs showing that you got gas along the way? Do you have any pictures taken that say location Nashville?
Let's say I don't, right? But I believe firmly, right? I was in Nashville a week ago. I remember it.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean, would you take that? Is my fact of remembering a one-time event, is that a sufficient or justifiable reason for me to believe it? Do you think I'm an irrational person if I believe that?
The examples you're giving me are not like, they don't hold enough weight. I don't care if somebody has faith that they were in Nashville one day or some shit. I care when your entire fundamental belief system is built around a religious belief that demands faith in order to obtain salvation.
That is fair enough. It's completely fair to say that this is of a different kind or quality, a thing that deserves more attention. And that's why it has gotten more attention. That's why there are still people doing philosophy of religion. But what we're talking about is just generally how I form beliefs and how I justify them when I'm asked, and whether or not that belief is justified, and whether or not I'm behaving as we want a rational person to behave in continuing to believe the thing that I do, right? And those things are
that Nashville exists.
And these are things that are in common across many different types of belief formation, even the ones that, yes, have these like dramatic and consequential, these dramatic consequences, right? That how I form these beliefs is in common between them. So I'm saying you're taking this category of a particular kind of belief and saying it could never be justified, even if this person is going through the same process that an ordinary person would for any other belief that they have to justify it. Right. So I've been told that God exists. All right. So I'm gonna go. I'm not sure. I have some doubts.
Let me put you on hold for just a split second.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
All right, sorry about that. I'm back.
Okay, so let me give you the example of somebody who's like who's raised in the faith, right? We both were, and they find themselves having some doubts. I think that a rational person who has been taught to believe a certain thing and has been taught that there are certain people in their lives that are authorities, the first place they might look is that authority. Like you described in your video, right? Somebody tried to fix your doubts with more religion, right? I might go talk to a priest or a pastor and I might ask some questions. They might point me toward books authored by Christians, right? That's one thing that I could do to try to test that belief. I might find that persuasive and I might find no further reason to try to justify my belief. To me, like, I found it persuasive. Okay, might not persuade everybody, but it has. Okay, let's say I doubt more. I might go beyond that. I might go into specialized academic niches. I might start studying textual reception and the history of the New Testament and the Old Testament, early Christians and how they practiced and worshipped, and that might persuade me. I might get to a point where I think, okay, no, this is sufficient reason. Like, I might find these testimonies about miracles wildly persuasive, and I could end my inquiry there, or I could keep going. I could become a scholar like Richard Swinburne or any of these New Testament scholars who do this stuff. I could spend my whole life studying this stuff and find that, yeah, everything to me comports with my belief, and I'm going to hang on to it. I think that is a person who's behaving as a rational person would. That's the kind of person we want in the world, and those people do exist and still hold on to their faith. I'm saying you're saying they basically don't exist, or you disagree with their methods of inquiry, or you think they have some like fundamental failure in reasoning or in self-deception that's leading them to stay a Christian.
I just don't know how you would consider yourself a Christian without evidence. I just don't know. Like, you're saying the evidence is like maybe you read a book or an argument in favor of this thing. But yet, where's the evidence?
So, all right, let's say I want to figure out when the Iliad was authored, okay? I want to know the date. I want to know when the Iliad was written down. I'm going to have to go look at some evidence. And I'm going to look at evidence, maybe some old texts that reference the Iliad. And I find that they go back to the 500s BCE. And I say, okay, well, I figured it out. It's at least before then, right? But in searching for that evidence, I've taken evidence from another authority. Somebody told me that the book that I just looked at or read that referenced the Iliad was that old. So maybe I could question that authority. How do they know? So I can look at dating methods. I could look at competing perspectives, right? There's a chain of authorities that we could go through and evidence that can satisfy different rational people at different levels. And I don't think that the person who's failed to go back to that chain all the way back to, can I trust my own eyes, is an irrational person.
No, I don't. I never have said that either. So that's the first thing. Second of all, if you're talking about going back and looking at historical references, again, my fundamental belief does not hinge upon whether or not the Iliad was written by a specific person. Those words, that story exists, and that's where the value is. When you're talking about the Christian faith, there's more than that. There is the faith and trust and belief that Jesus Christ was in fact God, that he rose from the dead. These are necessary things to believe.
Yep.
That's why Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. People try to say the same thing about Socrates. Oh, where's the evidence that Socrates exists? I don't know. Even if you were able to give me evidence that he didn't exist, I don't have to believe in Socrates.
Yep.
You do need to believe in Jesus.
Absolutely. I'm saying that even if I could not give you a double-blind, peer-reviewed lab study that demonstrates Jesus' divinity, a rational person could believe in it. And I think it's just an ad hoc, silly definition of rational or irrational to assume that all the people who believe that thing by default are irrational.
But you're saying they would believe it based on testimony.
Yeah, that is a way that we form belief reliably.
Written by anonymous authors.
Yes.
Over 40 years after the supposed events occurred.
Sure.
And also, how is the Bible reliable when time and time again it's been discredited? Especially the Old Testament.
I'm sure you could ask the people who've spent their lives studying it and have remained Christians how they're able to hang on to that. You could ask them. They exist. And I'm saying they're irrational people.
Okay. Yeah, somebody made a good point in chat. They said it would be rational to say, here's a hypothesis, but it could be wrong. It's not rational to handle it like 100% certainty based on some anecdotes, inferences, etc.
I think that when we profess belief in something, whether it's a faith-based belief or not, we are affirming fundamentally that we think it's more likely true than not. And so, yeah, I agree in a sense.
How are they affirming that if the Bible has multiple different historical inaccuracies, several different flaws, there's no evidence to support a plethora of the stories told to us in the Bible? How is it then rational to just infer that it's probably correct?
If we want to have a specific conversation on like textual criticism and specific parts of the Bible that you're referencing, we can. Like I don't want to do this like off the top of my head. Again, I'm not the person to be doing this. I'm addressing what you made as a universal claim that none of the people who have looked at those things and argued about them for literally millennia and addressed the arguments that you're making, that none of those people have a reasonable basis for their conclusions. And I think that
they
is
don't have
absurd.
a reasonable basis. It just tends to be irrational when your ultimate basis is faith.
So yeah, again, I'm
So
saying
you don't need to have faith in things that are evidence. I don't have faith that gravity exists. We have evidence that there is a concept called gravity.
I still am not certain how you're using the word faith. That's getting us to the point where after all this conversation, you're still saying that somebody who has faith on some grounded basis that was persuasive to them is doing it in a fundamentally irrational way, right? So we conceded at the beginning.
I'm saying it can be believed to be rational to them, sure, but I would almost be willing to guarantee that if we start having a conversation about this, then no, it would be proven irrational.
That's true of almost anybody who holds to almost anything. This is what we see every day in Twitch politics. Somebody comes in with a really strong belief and they're proven to be irrational because it's not something that they've thought through. But it's not irrational in the sense that you are using it here. Those people are not fundamentally irrational for holding that belief. They might be if they continue to hold to it when presented with, a completely contradictory piece of evidence, if such a thing existed. But what ordinary people do is form beliefs through ordinary means, and they have those beliefs sometimes for good reasons. Sometimes they couldn't articulate
the gravitas of the
I'm aware, right? But I'm conceding that the claim itself is of a different type, right? It is something far more monumental. I agree. I'm saying that your language here is invoking words that are used in particular ways in philosophy to talk about how we know things and how we arrive at conclusions and beliefs rationally or not. And that's a really important thing to a lot of people, right? It's important to people of faith to think that they have some reason for believing it. Like, yes, again, I'm just still not sure like where you're getting, where you're jumping in with this idea that a faith-based belief could not be rational in the way that we described. I'm having trouble articulating like what the thing that I'm
maybe
trying to pin down.
Maybe we can have another conversation about like what you think are the rational justifications to be a Christian.
I'm not opposed to that. I'm saying I think you could just look and find them quite easily. Right, if you just want to start on like a survey level, there's an Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy article called Faith and Reason, and you can go through basically the whole history of philosophy about how people of faith have tried to reconcile their rational pursuits with their faith. They're competing, ways that people have done this, but they've done it or they've tried to, right? So you can just start reading and just dig into any of those. John Henry Newman, Catholic saint, right, has let's see, what's the book? He has this book, an essay in aid of a grammar of assent. It's a really dense tome, but he's like, look, here's how I think people come to assent to beliefs that they hold, and here's how that works in a religious context, and here's why I think that's a reasonable and rational thing for you to do on the basis of authority and history and tradition and all these things, right?
Sure. My final question then would just be that if faith can in fact justify any belief, how can it be rational when it comes to the Christian belief?
Well, I'm not saying that faith as a category it is rational, right? We've just said there are good reasons and bad reasons people might hold any given belief. You could be a person of faith for a very bad reason. I think that's possible. I'm not denying that. But the fact that there is this category of special belief that we're calling faith that can be used just off the top of my head to justify anything doesn't mean that all faith is then bad and unjustifiable.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate your arguments, and I definitely understand where you're coming from. I can also appreciate the arguments you're making, which is that it is possible to have rational faith. But I guess maybe this is just coming down to semantics, because if it's rational, if it's justified, then I don't know why you would use the word faith.
Well, because, I mean, yeah, there are things that are accepted on faith that I don't think are contrary to reason, which is what I take irrational to mean. Right? There are things that I could believe on top of other things that I might have some really good scientific or logical evidence for, and people can ask me why I believe it, and it's because I was told that by an authority that I believe has some sort of divine weight. Right? That's my reason, and the reason I trust that might be built on these other rational things that I could provide a better argument for. But at some point, I'm accepting an authority that is final, and I'm going to accept things that that again, like, yeah, it's not contrary to reason. It is super rational, is the way that Christian thinkers have described it, right? So there are things that you take on in addition to your reason. Your reason can't get you the whole way, is sort of how Aquinas treats it. So
Well, I mean, either way, I really appreciate the conversation. I think you made some really good arguments, and this was definitely far more refreshing as compared to the previous conversations we had today. So.
Yeah, the red pill one was it sounded fun. I might have to go back and listen to that. He seemed convincing. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, yeah, really. I basically just gave up with him. There's conversations that are just so ridiculously boring because they're so obviously wrong. I'm like, you know what? It's just not worth my time.
That's fair enough.
But yeah.
Well, I appreciate it.
Well, maybe we can have another conversation sometime here soon.
Yeah, I'd love to. I won't flame you in your Twitter replies. I'll just message you.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, have a good one.
You're always welcome to flame me in my Twitter replies though too, if that's what you want to do.
Sounds good. Have a good one. Bye. All right. Well, that was interesting. Sorry, I was trying not to read chat because I was having trouble following his train of thought sometimes. So I was going 100 different directions. I don't think I made several points I wanted to make quite well enough, but it's fine. It's an ongoing conversation, I hope or think. But yeah, sorry. I'm glad Bagel's here. Definitely doesn't understand it then. Yeah. Oh, what's the Christian belief? Yeah. So that's a good question, Origin. I think that's, love when you win and he just says, "Hey, good job, K-Bye." I love it. There's no thought, only science. Well, Corey's a scientist in here, and Corey knows that, science is great. I don't mind science. I tell people this all the time in political conversations and philosophical conversations. If I think I'm right, I expect there to be some evidence of that, right? There are things, I would expect things to be a certain way if I'm right about certain things that I believe to be true politically. And if the evidence... Riddle nerd! No! Don't ban John! I need John for housing at TwitchCon. I expect there to be some reality to the reality, some truth to the truth, right? I think it should be demonstrable somehow. I just think that there's a how do I say this? There's a way of thinking that takes science as an arbiter of truth in a relatively unquestioned way that I have a lot of trouble with, right? John, I recommended John Henry Newman and Aquinas. Aren't you proud of me? Yeah, it's over, Ian. We kind of hit a wall where I think we found the root of the disagreement or the argument. Oh, thank you, Dr. Professor. I don't know if I'll grow, but it's nice having some people watching some fun things that aren't just like brainless yelling. I think it was the mental block maybe that we could have cleared earlier and maybe had more productive conversation was, but thank you, Dr. Professor. I really appreciate that. Was the idea of faith and accepting something on faith, meaning it is inherently contrary to reason, I think was the assumption that he holds. I don't know. And that may be the line, right? That, other John Bagel, Bearded Blevins is John Blevins. That may be the line we were kind of dancing around and didn't quite hit, was that like, I think that like, no, not our John. I don't think he's in here. It'd be cool if he was. I understand why somebody would say, okay, so if you accept something on faith, you are doing it in a way that is not intellectually rigorous. I think that is the way that he's thinking. My point that I thought we had hashed out at the beginning, but I think we were still dancing around, was that I think you can have faith-based beliefs that more or less comport with reason. Right? I could hallucinate a spaghetti monster and have faith in it, and that's not a great reason. I could alternatively place faith in the claims made by historic people who wrote things down and presented arguments and evidence, right? I mean, you see this, like, I might be interested in talking to him sometime about the particulars of like the New Testament stuff. I think that people tend to, when it comes to like New Testament scholarship, people tend to like get a little red pilled on critical scholarship and then like kind of hit a wall and they don't really read further. When it turns out that like some of the craziest things that are associated with like the critical textual tradition in the New Testament have kind of been done away with, right? There's some pretty wacky stuff happening in the late 1800s and early 1900s, mid 20th century. And then now we have like better documents and better evidence, and people are like, actually, it's probably closer in time than we thought before. Actually, some of the traditional attributions of authorship might be true. Actually, that kind of thing, right? So I might be interested in talking about some of that stuff. It's not my wheelhouse, really. I've read a little bit, but not enough to, I think, like... But so right at the end, it was going kind of scattershot, right? Like, well, how can you rationally trust the Bible when there's all these problems with it, right? There's all these flaws. There's all these things, especially in the Old Testament, but then even the New Testament, and then like there's stuff. It was just very scattershot. I don't think that would be hard to do effectively. I think, right? You've got to. I would want to have like, let's talk about authorship of some New Testament text, or let's talk about whether or not Jewish people were slaves in Egypt, right? These kind of like historical questions about we could do that. I don't think I'm the best person for it, and I don't think that is essential to the conversation that I wanted to have about the tweet, right? What I kept wanting to go back to is that the tweet, I'll leave it up for a second. The tweet is totalizing. It doesn't admit of the possibility that somebody could justifiably believe things about Christianity, or that in his other tweet, right, that it doesn't admit of the possibility that somebody could do critical analysis of the faith and come away still believing it. It assumes, I think, for him, that things like critical scholarship are defeaters to the faith, which I don't think is true, and it's evidenced by the fact that people have gone through this stuff and still remain Christian. That's not going to be persuasive. I'm not an apologist. I don't feel like I have that like calling or education. I can't be a person who's going to answer all of your arguments against Christianity. that wasn't the point, or I didn't think it was the point. The point was he's making a whole, like a universal claim. He's making an all statement, and all it takes to prove an all statement wrong is one counterexample. So if any of these people, from Swinburne to John Henry Newman to Aquinas, if any of these people are rational, then he's wrong. It's just wrong.